Hey everybody, Mike and Hannah here with First Wave, the innovation lab at Delta Faucet Company.
Today we're going to walk you through how to install a Touch2O kitchen faucet with oxidized water technology. The installation of this faucet is very similar to a standard kitchen faucet with a few extra steps.
Now it's important to note that this faucet requires an unswitched GFCI outlet beneath the sink to power the oxidized water box. Now keep in mind, an unswitched outlet is one that's not controlled by a switch and provides constant power at all times.
At the end of this video, I'll give you a quick overview of how to use both the touch and oxidized water technologies.
Yeah, and for more helpful tips, check out our separate video that covers the functions and uses of this oxidized water faucet. As with any technology, issues can arise, so we'll also talk through some of the most common troubleshooting topics.
Okay, let's collect the tools and supplies we'll need to get started. You'll need a couple of adjustable wrenches, a towel for some light water cleanup, a bucket, a Phillips head screwdriver, preferably a long one as it'll be easier to use, maybe a tube of silicone sealant, a flashlight, and of course, a pair of safety glasses. All right, once you have those tools and supplies, let's do this. The first step is mounting the faucet to your sink or countertop. Now, if you have a 3-hole sink configuration, you'll need to use the included discussion to cover the outer 2 holes. Now, if you do need to use this, you can refer to the instructions included in your packaging for how to install it. As you can see, we have a single hole configuration, so we won't need to use this. All right, let's go ahead and move on to mounting our faucet. Now, before we mount our faucet, there's a couple of things to check. The first is to make sure that this foam gasket here is installed on the bottom of the base. If it's not installed, you can contact First Wave customer service. Now, if you're installing this faucet on an uneven surface like a tile countertop, you will need to run a bead of silicone sealant all along this foam gasket here. So the second thing to check is to make sure that this base here is installed correctly. So it should come assembled within your box, but in case it shifted in packaging, we just want to make sure that it's installed. So there are some wires within this base here that you want to be careful of. You don't want to drag those along this shank here and damage them. So we're just going to gently move this up, and you'll see there these alignment tabs right here. Those are going to fit in right underneath this Delta logo and just kind of snap into place, just like that. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and place our faucet in our mounting hole. So I'm going to grab our supply lines, our cable, and our shank, and I'm going to gently guide those down into our mounting hole, making sure that I don't damage anything or pinch any of these. And I also want to make sure that I don't rip this tag. It does have important information like your model number on it. All right, once you've got that placed, you're going to make sure that this is centered. So you want this base here with this LED indicator light and button on it to be centered. And you want this handle to be parallel with the edge of the sink. Now this is where it's really helpful to have 2 people for this install so that I can be up here holding onto the faucet, making sure that it stays straight and centered while Mike is underneath, tightening it down.
Here we are underneath the sink, about ready to start securing our faucet into place. Now the first thing you'll notice is I've taken a little bit of time to go ahead and clean out everything from underneath the cabinet here to give myself the maximum amount of space to work in. Now before I secure the faucet into place, I do want to talk through the steps because it's a little bit easier to do that out here rather than behind the sink. So to do this, we're going to be using 2 things. This mounting bracket, followed by this mounting nut, everything tightening up over the shank of the faucet. Now this mounting bracket has 2 sides. The top side has this metal plate on it that's going to come in contact with the bottom of our countertop or the sink that we're installing the faucet on. It also has this little ridge in here that we want to make sure is fitting securely into the middle of the existing hole on the countertop or the sink to ensure that the touch functionality of the faucet works correctly. Once we have that snugged into place, we're going to come back and tighten up the 2 locking screws on the bottom that will lock the alignment of the faucet into place and make sure it doesn't move in the future. Now, once that mounting bracket's slipped up onto the shank of the faucet, we're going to tighten it into place using this mounting nut. Now I think it's a little bit of a pro tip here to preload the mounting nut into the included black wrench that comes with your faucet. Makes it that much easier when you're working in the tight quarters behind the sink. This is going to go ahead and thread up over the shank onto the bottom of the mounting nut and hold it snugly in place before we lock down those 2 locking screws. Now one final note here is if you're installing the faucet onto an extremely thin deck surface, something like say a stainless steel sink, The first thing you're going to want to use is this included plastic spacer. This will slide on first before the mounting bracket. This will basically help make sure that your faucet stays locked into place on that thin deck surface. Okay, with all that said, let's go ahead and move up underneath the back of the sink here and start locking our faucet into place. So to start, we're going to take our mounting bracket, again making sure I have that metal surface facing up towards the bottom of my sink or countertop. I'm going to take my sprayer hose and feed it down through the middle of my mounting bracket, and then start pushing it up towards the shank. Now you'll see it has this cutout in the side of the mounting bracket. That's for all of my wires and my hoses here. I want to make sure everything gets fed in there with nothing getting pinched. And I'm going to slide it over the end of the threaded shank and then up towards the bottom of my countertop or sink deck. Now with that in place, I'm going to take my black wrench with that nut preloaded in there. Similar to before, take my sprayer hose, get it down through the center of the wrench and the nut, and push the whole thing up towards the bottom of the shank. And I think it's helpful to use your free hand to kind of pull those wires off to the side. Now that we have that mounting bracket snugly in place, it's a great opportunity to check one last time for alignment up above the sink to make sure you're happy with the placement of the faucet. And once it looks great, come down here with your Phillips head screwdriver and tighten each one of these locking screws to lock that faucet into place. I like to tighten one side, move to the other, tighten that side up as well, and then I always go back to the first screw just to make sure nothing loosened up. All right, now our faucet's locked into place. Now that we have our faucet locked into place, we can move on to connecting our supply lines to our supply stops. Now the supply lines are these two longer PEX lines coming out the bottom of the faucet, and if you look at the bottoms, they're actually color coded. So the blue one stands for cold water, and the red one stands for hot water. Now before we connect these supply lines to the supply stops themselves, we do have to install the included check valves to ensure the faucet functions properly. Now these check valves come in two pieces. It's got an insert and then the check valve body itself. Now we're going to install one check valve on each of the hot and the cold supplies. And to do this, you're going to start by taking the insert. I'm going to start with the hot water supply, placing the insert into my supply stop, followed by my check valve body, over the insert, and then thread it onto the supply stop itself. And as I do this, I want to make sure I'm not pinching the insert in any way, and then it threads easily on. Once I've got that hand tight, I'm going to use an adjustable wrench. I'm going to give the supply stop and the check valve just another half turn or so to ensure that it's nice and snug on there. All right, that wraps up the hot side, so same steps for the cold now. Insert on first, followed by the check valve body. Again, hand threading it on there, making sure it threads nice and easy. And then snug it up with my adjustable wrench. All right, we've got those check valves on there now. Now, since our faucet has oxidized water capabilities, we have one more adapter to install, and that's this T adapter we're going to be installing on the cold water supply stop on the end of the check valve that we just installed. And what this is going to do is basically split that supply of cold water, allowing one side to run directly to the faucet and the other side to run to our oxidized water box. Now, it is important to make sure this is on the cold water supply, not the hot. So once you're ready, I'm going to take this T adapter. I'm going to come back to my cold water supply stop in the check valve and place the T adapter on the end of the check valve. Just like before, it should thread nice and easy on the end there. We're going to hand tighten it. We want to snug this up to ensure a watertight connection. So at this time, I'm going to use two adjustable wrenches. The first one's going to hold the check valve in place. And then the second, I'm going to tighten up the T adapter. Again, not over tightening it, just to make sure it's nice and snug. Now that we have our check valves and our T adapter in place, we can move on to connecting our PEX supply lines to the top of our check valves and to our T adapter. Now I'm going to start with the hot side here. And again, I'm just going to double check to make sure that I'm using the red tipped supply line to connect to my hot supply stop. You'll notice that my PEX supply line's a little bit long to get to my supply stop here. Now there's a few things I can do. The first is I can actually loop the PEX supply line to make it shorter. However, if I do loop it, I want to make sure that the loop doesn't get any less than about 8 inches in diameter, because that could kink the line and cause a flow issue. Now the other option I can do is also make more of like a helix shape, like a DNA strand, kind of spin it around itself a little bit, again keeping a close eye to make sure I'm not kinking or crimping anything, and then bring it directly to the top of my hot supply stop check valve. Once that's in place, I'm gonna again use my hand to hand tighten the nut into place until it's snug. Now once I've got that connected, I'm gonna use 2 adjustable wrenches this time. One is gonna hold my check valve, as I use the second to snug up that supply line to ensure a watertight connection. And just like before, I'm just making sure it's snug. I don't want to over tighten this connection. Now that we have our hot supply line connected, I can move on to the cold. Now just like before, I'm gonna grab my PEX supply line, give it a little bit of a helix shape here again, checking to make sure I'm not kinking it in any way, and then bring it directly to the end of my T-stop. Now it doesn't matter which one of the T-stop ones I connect it to, I'm just gonna do the end just to keep it consistent with the hot side. Just like before, I'm gonna use a couple adjustable wrenches. One to hold my T-adapter in place, the second to tighten up my supply line. Again, not over tightening it, just enough to make sure it's snug. All right, now that we have both of our faucet supply lines connected, there's one more supply line that we have to connect.
And that's this separate PEX line here that's gonna go to our oxidized box.
Now again, we're gonna take the tip that's got the blue coat on the bottom of it and bring it to the unconnected side of our T-adapter here. Place it right on top there, and then hand tighten it into place. And just like before, I'm gonna use an adjustable wrench, little turn or so until, again, it's just snug, not over tightened. Now that we have our supply lines connected, we can move on to flushing our lines. And what this means is basically running some water through our system to clean out any debris that may have been caught in there during the installation process. Now to do this, I'm going to be using a towel for some light water cleanup, as well as a bucket to catch the water that's going to be flowing out from our faucet underneath the sink here. So I'm going to go ahead and place my bucket kind of centered under the faucet here. Now when I start flowing water through our system, it's going to be coming out of 2 main places. The first is this oxidized water box supply line that we installed previously. So I'm going to take that and go ahead and direct that into the bottom of my bucket. And then the second location is a little harder to see. It's going to be out the end of the outlet tube, which is located on the bottom of the faucet. It's a short little tube that's probably tucked up behind your sink here. So as a little bit of a pro tip is when I'm running water through my system, I'm gonna hold my hand on the end of the outlet tube to make sure I'm directing the water into the bucket. And also you see this little data cable here. I'm gonna kind of keep that out of the way as well to make sure it doesn't get wet. Okay, once everything looks good, we're gonna go ahead and start running water through our system. So to do this, the first step is making sure the faucet above the deck is in the on and full mix position. This means halfway between the hot and the cold setting. Once that looks good, we're gonna come down here and turn on my hot water supply stop to the full position and let water start flowing. I'm gonna let it flow for about like 15 to 20 seconds and then go ahead and turn it off and then do the same things for the cold side. So once everything looks good, let's go ahead and flush our lines. All right, now that we get those lines flushed, I'm gonna remove the bucket full of water, pull out my oxidized water box supply, set that off to the side for now, and then use my towel to go ahead and clean up any splashing that may have happened while we were flushing those lines. Now that we have our lines flushed, we can move on to installing our oxidized water box, which I have here. Now before we do that, I do want to talk through the box just to give you a little bit of a reference point about how this is all going to connect. First, you can see it does have an orientation. It's got a big up with an arrow that's going to point to the bottom of our sink or our countertop. Now we're going to be connecting this top inlet tube here to the outlet tube. That's the one that the water just came out of at the bottom of the faucet. Once that's connected, we're going to be connecting our pull down sprayer hose into the outlet of the oxidized water box on the bottom here. That's the one labeled hose. And then finally, once those connections are made, we're going to be connecting our cold water supply line, the one coming off of the T adapter, into the bottom of the oxidized water box here at the input marked cold. All right, with all that in mind, let's take our oxidized water box and install it on the outlet tube of our faucet up behind our sink. gonna take my oxidized water box, line it up with that outlet tube, push it together until it seats fully, and then clip that blue clip into place. All right, now that we have that connected, we can move on to connecting our pull-down sprayer hose. Now that's this braided one here. Now the important thing to remember about this hose is it's connected to the pull-down wand on the faucet up above. So it's gonna be moving as we operate that wand when we're using our faucet. So when you do this, you wanna make sure that it's not wrapped around any of our supply lines or our supply stops or anything that's gonna cause it to snag when we're pulling that hose up and down. Once it looks good, you're gonna take your sprayer weight and feed it over the end of the hose like so. Take the end of your pull-down sprayer hose and push it over the bottom of the outlet labeled hose on the bottom of the oxidized water box. Once it's seated fully, take a blue clip, line it up, and then snap it into place like so. And I think it's a good idea to give it just a little bit of a gentle tug to ensure a tight connection there. Now that we have our pull-down sprayer hose connected, we can move on to connecting our cold water supply to the bottom of our oxidized water box here. Now, one thing you'll notice about the way I have my supply line now, with my T adapter sticking up, is that it's gonna be difficult for me to connect the supply line to the bottom of the oxidized water box without causing a kink. So a little bit of a pro tip here is that everybody's situation is gonna be different. But if you need to, you can always loosen up that T adapter slightly using an adjustable wrench, which will allow that adapter to change orientation. Now there should probably be an orientation that will work better for your connection, so just keep that in mind with however you need to make this connection. For me, I'm gonna use an adjustable wrench. Go ahead and loosen up that T adapter slightly. Not enough to take it off, just enough that you can see now that T adapter allows me some movement. So for me, here, I'm gonna actually swing it all the way around so it's facing kind of down, and now you can see it's much easier for me to make this cold water supply tube connection at the bottom of the oxidized water box. And again, just like before with the other supply lines, want to keep an eye to make sure that we're not kinking our line in any way that could cause a flow issue. Take my supply line, line it up with that cold water input on the bottom of the oxidized water box, make sure it's seated fully, and then when it looks good, snap that blue clip into place, and again, gentle tug down to ensure a nice watertight connection. All right, now we've made all of the water connections to the oxidized water box. Now here's something I really want you to keep in mind and that I want to stress. If you did have to loosen up that T adapter to change the orientation to make this last connection, be sure you take extra care to make sure you retighten that T adapter to the top of the check valve, or else you may have a leak down the road you're gonna have to deal with. Now that we've made all of our water connections, we can move on to making our wired connections. So the first connection we're gonna be making to our oxidized water box is the AC adapter that came included with your faucet. Now I wanna point out here that we're not plugging the faucet into the wall yet, we're just connecting the adapter to the box itself. So the end of the adapter is gonna connect to this location on the side of the box labeled power. Push it all the way in. And again, I'm just connecting to the box, I'm not connecting the AC power to the wall yet. Next, I'm going to take the data cable that's coming down off the base of the faucet up above and connect it to the base on the side of my oxidized water box until it clicks in fully. And the final thing I want to check is to make sure that this oxidized water cartridge cable here is plugged fully into the bottom of the oxidized water box, and that the cable itself extends away from the box here and is free of anything that could cause any interference. Once everything looks good there, I'm going to take my sense clip here, I'm going to attach it to the shank of the faucet up above. You can see it's got this C shape to it that we're going to clip onto the shank. We want to make sure that we're getting good contact between the clip and the shank, and also the clip is facing directly away from the sink. All right, now at this point we made all of our hose and our wired connections to our oxidized water box, but I do want to take a moment to offer a little bit of a pro tip here. There's a lot of instances where your installation might not be as clean looking as mine is because you have a big disposal in the way that could cause it to be difficult to make some of these wire connections that we just ran through. Keep in mind that you could disconnect the oxidized water box from that outlet tube running off the bottom of the faucet to drop the whole box a little bit lower, and that can give you a little bit more clearance to make all those wired connections that we just ran through. Once everything's connected, you can push that whole box back up and clip it back on the outlet tube of the faucet, and they'll be ready to move on to the next step. Next, we can move on to installing the battery pack to your faucet. Now, there's a few things I do want to point out about the battery pack itself. The first being that it does have a top and a bottom, and I can tell the bottom because it has these little feet that's gonna sit on in the bottom of the cabinet. Next, you can use either C or AA batteries. In either case, you're gonna be using 6 of them. However, if you are using the AA's, make sure you're using the included battery insert to make sure those stay exactly where they need to go. Also, on the outside of the pack here, you can see it shows you the orientation that each battery needs to be loaded in. So when you're ready, let's go ahead and load those batteries into the pack. For my application, I'm gonna be using the AA's. Again, keeping an eye on the orientation. I'm gonna go ahead and feed those AA batteries into the pack. All right, once I've got those loaded, I'm gonna take a look at the battery pack cap here. And again, just like the battery pack itself, it has a top and a bottom. The top is gonna be the side that has the wire coming out of it. I'm just gonna clip it onto the top here, making sure these little locking tabs are locked into their side holes like so. All right, now that I have my battery pack ready to go, we can place it inside of the cabinet, and there's a few things to note about this as well. The first being that we want to make sure that the battery pack is sitting flat on its feet on the bottom of the cabinet, so we're not mounting it on the wall, and we're not locating it on top of anything else. Also, we need to make sure it has a little bit of clearance around it. So I've got it about 1 inch or 2 away from any of the back or the side walls of the cabinet itself. And keep that in mind when you're reloading everything underneath your sink here. You're not pushing any cleaning supplies or anything up tight against that battery pack. And then finally, we also want to keep an eye on the battery pack wire itself that connects back to the oxidized water box, making sure it's not wrapped around any supply stops or my pull down sprayer hose or anything that could cause some interference, especially this AC wire and the AC outlet itself that we're going to be connecting in a later step. Now, if everything looks good, we can go ahead and turn on both of our cold and hot water supply stops. And I think this is a great opportunity to go ahead and check for leaks while we're down underneath the sink, checking each of those connection points of the check valve as well as that T adapter to make sure there's nothing that needs to be corrected. Everything looks pretty good here, so let's go ahead and move back up top.
All right, now it's time to condition our system. So all that means is that we're gonna let water run through it before plugging it into the wall. All right, this is a crucial step. You do risk damaging your system if you skip it. It's really easy to do. All you're gonna do is turn your handle on to the full mix position. That's right in between hot and cold, and you're gonna let it run until the automatic shutoff feature happens after 4 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and turn it on. All right, so we've let our faucet run for 4 minutes, and now it's time to check for leaks at all of our connections. So you wanna check underneath the sink and up top. If all looks good, we're ready to move on to plugging it into the wall. Now it does need to be plugged into a GFCI unswitched outlet. So what that means is that it's not controlled by a switch and that it has constant power. All right, let's go ahead and plug it in. So to use the touch feature, the handle does need to be in the on position. So to turn it on, it's a single tap anywhere on the faucet, spout, body, or handle, just not the wand. And to turn it off, it's another single tap. It does know the difference between a tap and a grab. So again, a single tap to turn it on, and then you can grab it and move the spout around. You can also grab the handle and it won't turn off. You can turn it to cold and the LED indicator light will turn blue, letting you know that the water is cold. And you can move it to hot and the LED light indicator will turn red for hot. Now to activate oxidized water, it's a double tap, again, anywhere on the faucet besides this wand. So you'll see that this LED light turns green to let you know that it's activated oxidized water. And you can also see that there's a lower flow of water, and you might be able to smell a scent too to let you know that it's working. So to turn it off, it's a single tap. Now you can also activate oxidized water by this button down here. So you just press it on, again, it will turn green to let you know that it's activated. And you can also turn it off by that button. So you can also use that button when the handle is in the off position, and it will still activate oxidized water. All right, so to learn more about the functions and uses of this faucet, we do have a separate video for that, so be sure to check that out. And that wraps up our install. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to the First Wave customer service team. They're more than happy to help.